Hello, everyone.
Hi, welcome to Adult Forum Summary.
With Father Stephen and Mother Cameron.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so just really quick to catch people up. I'm not going to do a whole ton of summary for this week because if you watched the church service this morning, you already got your summary. We read a story from Joshua. So last week we talked about the walls of Jericho falling down. And then we talked about Joshua leading the people into the promised land and how all that went. And anything else you want to say about Joshua, Father Stephen?
Well, the Joshua story says that the hill country to the north and the plains in central Palestine and the southern desert area all became one nation under Joshua in his leadership, and later the leadership of the judges. They did not take the coastlands. We have to be clear about that. The Greeks, the Phoenicians, and the Philistines were already settled on the coastlands, and they were a much more advanced society than any of the Israelites or Canaanites could ever be at that point in history. So they didn't challenge them. That had to wait till David. To wait till Saul and David before they started challenging the Greeks, the Phoenicians, and the Philistines along the coast.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So more what we talked about today was that so Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110 years old. And they buried him within the bonds of his inheritance in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. And moreover, the whole generation was gathered to their ancestors, and another generation grew up after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel. And so what we're going to talk about today is that the Lord raised up judges. And basically, this phrase throughout the chapter gets repeated over and over and over and over again, that the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord, they abandoned God and the God of their ancestors that had brought them out of Egypt, and they followed other gods. And the Lord was provoked to anger. And so the Lord would strengthen up whoever it was that was an opposition to them. And he would help this other person to punish those that had fallen away from him. And then they would whine and cry, and God would hear their pleas and feel bad. And so he would raise up for them a judge. And for a while, they would follow the Lord and do things that were pleasing to God. And then the Israelites again would do what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And he would strengthen up the opposition, and they would whine and complain, and he would raise up a judge for them, and they would follow the Lord. And then again, the Israelites would do what was...
Yes.
There you go. It's the whole chapter.
Yeah. Well, get used to it. We do the same thing in 1st and 2nd Kings.
So that's the gist of Judges. But there were a couple of stories that the path pulled out, and then there's a couple that Father Stephen and I discussed that were like, how could they leave out this other story? So I'm going to go over with you really fast the ones that we did get in the chapter, and Father Stephen's going to provide us with some extra information.
Yes.
You will, as well as I, we are going to greatly miss Father Stephen's extra information. This will not be nearly as informative without it. So after the death of Joshua, we said they raised up judges, and the Israelites did what was evil, and they worshiped the gods of Baal and Asherahs, and they would anger the Lord. And so we get Eglon and Ehud in this particular fight between them, that the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud, son of Gera, the Benjaminite. Oh, but the Benjaminites are going to show up again later.
Yeah, this is later.
So he was a left-handed man. I'm not quite sure why that's important, but equal opportunity, right and left-handed people can be servants of the Lord. And he was, so Ehud is sent tribute to him to the king of Eglon of Moab. So Ehud makes for himself a sword with two edges, and he fastens it. It's a very descriptive story. He puts it basically under his clothes and attaches it to his thigh, very like James Bondish. Anyway, and so he gets there, and while the king is in the restroom, Ehud follows him in and shoves the sword into his belly past the hilt, so that the story is that the sword goes into him and like dissolves. So, and then like there's nothing but dust. It's a great story.
It's really graphic.
It is very graphic. But then the Ehud has been raised up. The people follow Ehud, and then Ehud dies.
And the people do what is evil in the sight of the Lord.
They did.
Can I give you some insight into what is evil in the sight of the Lord? About
Sure.
why God keeps raising up judges? Because the Israelites keep worshiping these Baals. That's the gods of the Canaanites. Now, there's a reason why this happened, because the Israelites came into the land. They were herders and sheep herders, and they had animals. They were not settled farmers. So when they took over the land from the Canaanites, they had to raise crops like the Canaanites did, and had to use the farms that the Canaanites had that they took from them. But they didn't know how to farm. And so the Canaanites said, well, we have this religion whereby we reenact, God inseminating the land and, the land bearing fruit. It's just like, pregnancy. So if you go to this temple of Baal, you can sleep with a temple prostitute, and that will symbolize the growth of the crops in the land, and your crops will do well. And the Israelite farmers are going, now, wait a minute, we go to this temple, we get to sleep with a prostitute, and our crops come up? Well, yeah, essentially, yes, said the Canaanites. So the Israelites said, where do we go? Let's start. And needless to say, God was like, no, this is not how we do things.
This is not how
I was deeply disappointed.
that was
anyway,
not pleasing in the sight of God.
That's right. As I had to admit during the class today, that when I was in seminary, we were discussing and learning about the gods of the Baals. I muttered under my breath, the wrong religion won, and my professor was not pleased with me. But but you get the idea. This is what happened. Literally, the Israelites were trying to figure out how to be farmers, and they turned to other gods of the Canaanites because they were successful farmers, to find out what the gods could do for them. So yeah, it was an abandonment.
Okay, so I have to, like, this just popped in my head and is totally random. But the angel appears to the shepherds. And if Israelites were originally herders, is that supposed to mean something?
Absolutely it is. Absolutely it is. Because by the time you get to first century Rome, agriculture is the source of power and wealth. And sheep herding and herding of animals is not even a close second. It's all about the grain. It's all about the food you can store for a time. Animals, they give you milk, they give you fresh meat, but that's the point. It's fresh. It doesn't get stored. It doesn't get accumulated like wealth. And by the first century, Rome is awash in agriculture wealth. And so this is a kind of poke at Rome. We always like the shepherds better. It's part of our history.
There you go. All right, see? More random information for everyone. All right, so then back to the judges. So then we get the story of Deborah, Sisera, and Jael. And so the story of Deborah is that she summons Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh and Naphtali, and says to him, the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you to go take a position at Mount Tabor, bringing 10,000 from the tribe of Naphtali and the tribe of Zebulun. And I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army. And so basically, between them, they trap Sisera's army in the middle of this mountain. And so Deborah, with the help of Barak, I think it's kind of a way for her to keep her hands clean, but they kill the army and overtake them. And so Sisera flees away to the tent of Jael's wife. And then we get, again, another very graphic story where Jael's wife, Jael, wife of Heber, takes a tent peg and drives it into his temple. He asks for protection, and she offers it by driving a peg into his temple and through his temple into the ground. So like, this is a massive peg. And he dies. And then they come looking for him. As Barak came in pursuit of Sisera, Jael went out to greet him and said, "Come, I'll show you the man you're seeking." Here he is. So anyway, so then they go to clearly this is then where the writers of the path go, and there's just too many for us to tell, because then they go, it happened first with Othniel, then with Ehud, then with Shamgar, then Deborah, then Gideon, then Tola, then Jair, then Jephthah, and Ibzan, and Elon, and then Abdon, and yet God continued to hear and respond to the cry of his people in spite of their faithlessness. Right, so yeah. And then they go, by the way, there's also Samson and Delilah. And so as I shared with the group earlier this morning, Samson's got some issues because Delilah proves to him 3 times that, she says, "Tell me how, from what you get your strength, Samson." And she
bats her eyes.
And he tells her something false. And she does it. She binds him up and he breaks free. Ha ha. And she's like, "You didn't tell me the truth. And so please tell me what it is where your strength comes from." And he tells her something, and she does it again. And so after 3 times of telling her how to take his strength, he should know by now that she's really going to do it. He tells her the 4th time actually how to take his strength away, because he's an idiot. And so,
Samson is an idiot.
I mean, we romanticize this story about Samson and Delilah, like we sing about it, right? But she cuts his hair. And not just like the 7 little locks, because that didn't do it. I had to like shave his head. So the question was raised, like, when his hair grew back, wouldn't his strength have returned? And I had shared with them that no, his mama had promised to raise him as a Nazarite, one who would not come in contact with a corpse, drink alcohol, or shave the hair of his head. And so he had touched a corpse. He had drunken revelry of his own doing. And then Delilah shaves his head. It's kind of like the inability to reclaim your virginity once it's gone. Like, so if his hair grows back, it's already been cut, right? Like, you can't undo the fact that you've had your first haircut. Anyway, so he loses his strength. She delivers him to the Philistines. They gouge out his eyes. Again, very graphic of how they abuse him. They make him perform for them. We discussed, what did that mean? Like, did they poke at him? Did they make him try and perform feats of strength and just to laugh at him because he couldn't do it anymore? Like, were they trying to make him sing and dance for them? Like, what does it mean that he had to perform for them? I don't know. But then he prays to God one last time as they're about to drag him into the temple, and says, "Return to me my strength so that I can repay them for what they have done by gouging out my eyes, and I will die with them." And he ends up killing more people by crushing the temple than he ever killed in his career as a judge, for lack of way of putting it. So Samson dies. And we end with, "In those days there was no king in Israel. All the people did whatever they wanted."
Well, it gets to that story too quick, because there are actually 3 stories that we really should highlight if you really want to know the fullness of Judges. One is Gideon. whose original name is Jerubbaal, which is a Canaanite name, which may be a hint because what happens, there are 3 Canaanites who become judges in Israel. At least that's what we know by their names. They had Canaanite names. So we're assuming that some outside force like Moab or the Amalekites or the Edomites or somebody else from outside Palestine is invading. And it's only when the Israelites and the Canaanites work together that they seem to be able to repel the invaders. Another theme that comes up over and over again is the idea that with one person, Samson, or with 300 people, in the case of Gideon, the Israelites / Canaanites can defeat whatever invaders if they just trust in God. So, Gideon has 300 people go with him and they go against 120,000 Amalekites and they defeat them. So, because they trusted in God. By the way, the Amalekites were the first people to domesticate camels and use them for warfare. So that was probably terrifying, having people come at you riding these gigantic beasts that were bigger than horses and attacking you.
But I've met camels. I mean, I've gotten to know a couple of camels.
What's that?
I said I've encountered a few camels. They're really not scary. I guess maybe if they're charging at you in large.
If they're charging at you, watch Lawrence of Arabia. You got a bunch of camels charging at you. It's pretty scary.
Just try not to get spit on.
So anyway, Gideon is the story that talks about Canaanites and Israelites cooperating together, trusting in God, and God wins in the end. But it goes downhill from there. One of the judges is Jephthah, and Jephthah is so thrilled that he's won a victory that he arrogantly boasts that when he arrives at home, he will sacrifice to the Lord whatever he sees first upon his arrival at home, to thank God for delivering him from his enemy. And of course, the thing that Jephthah sees first when he gets home is his daughter. And he blames his daughter instead of himself for his horrible boast. And Jephthah's daughter becomes the hero of the story because she is faithful to this promise, even though it's the promise of a fool. And she gives thanks to God. So it's kind of a sad and terrifying story. And it just shows how crazy everything was during the time of the Judges. It finally breaks down. I mean, the final straw for the whole book of Judges and why everything is so bad is the story of the Levite and his concubine. The Levite apparently is traveling around giving blessing to whoever pays him the most. Apparently, he's the local priest for whatever tribe wants him. He goes down to Benjamin, and the tribe of Benjamin sabotages his concubine, they abuse her and kill her. And the Levite is so incensed by this that he cuts the woman's corpse up, isn't that grand, and has it sent to the various tribes of Israel, the 11 other tribes, and said, we have to punish the Benjamites. Here they are, the Benjamites come back for what they have done. And so they kill nearly everybody in the tribe of Benjamin, but not totally, because after all, they are still a tribe of Judah. They are still a tribe in Israel. And so they refurbish them, replenish them, so to speak. But it's after devastating the vast majority of the tribe. So that's what leads to that final statement. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and there was no king in Israel. So that's where that came from.
All right.
Yeah. Wow.
That joyful note. So a couple of the questions that we had small groups discuss today, we gave them 2 things to go out and discuss. One was that the book of Judges has many stories that might seem more appropriate for like a soap opera or a blockbuster film. Ehud kills Eglon in the bathroom and then sneaks out the window. Jael kills the king after lulling him to sleep in her lap. And Samson falls for Delilah's ridiculous tricks again and again. So how do you wrestle with these stories as part of our holy scriptures? And what might the presence of these kind of stories and these kinds of people tell us about salvation history? So we discussed that. And then they were sent out into small groups again to ponder that God yearns for people to turn to him as their leader, their judge, and their king, rather than needing earthly judges and kings to tell them how to live.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is so difficult for people? And how do you struggle, or how do we struggle with this same challenge in our day and time that we are still struggling with? How to yearn for God, for the people of God, for God to be our leader and judge and king. So,
well, that's a good question.
So part of that we discussed was that the way we interpreted it was that no matter who your national cultural community leader is, that you are continually striving to please God, that your ultimate allegiance is to faith and to continuing to no matter who the leader is that you're trying to do what is pleasing in God's sight.
Yeah. It's like there's two extremes. I mean, on the one extreme, if you don't have, values as a community that are enforced by a state or the laws, you descend into chaos. So, i.e., we need a king. But then God says, I want to be king. Well, yeah, we want God's values to influence our nation state, and that's really hard to figure out. On the other hand, so often when we do say that God is king, we create something called theocracy, where God is in charge. And in every theocracy I've ever known, whether it's the Cromwell government in England or the Taliban in Afghanistan, it turns into a bloodbath in the name of God. So it's just, somehow we got to balance it between chaos of no leadership and a theocracy that gets us to justify killing millions of people in the name of God.
Again, referenced in the service this morning, if you were here in person, Father Stephen, you talked about Reinhold Niebuhr, and also the prayers within our Book of Common Prayer about how, how this chapter ends with, and everyone did what was pleasing in his or her own eyes. Well, what those things are calling us to do, the prayers in our prayer book, and then and to some degree Niebuhr, and what the lesson was from Joshua today about what should be pleasing in our own eyes is following the moral ground of God.
Absolutely. Yep. That's what we're supposed to
do. Strive for. There you go. All right, so I'm going to share my screen for just a second. We're going to share with you the artwork for today. As we discussed, the stories this week are a bit graphic, so is our artwork. So just heads up. But it's art, so it's okay. All right, so here is JL. See her handy hammer here. And Deborah and Barak. So this Goya painting. Goya does a lot of Old Testament paintings.
He does.
If we've noticed throughout the weeks. Here we have Jael and Sisera. Again, we talked about how Sisera here has a very feminine figure. And he's not quite laying so that the nail could go into the ground. We took some issues with artist interpretation for this one, but anyway, so this is another one of Jael and Sisera. And then yet another Jael. Someone pointed out, nice tent, right? So again, we've noticed week after week how
tent, was it?
European and how worldly cultures have, they kind of set these Bible stories within the context of their own time. Anyway, so here was another one. And then here is the story of Ehud and Eglon.
As painted by Maurice Sendak.
Yes, somebody pointed out it was very where the wild things are. So anyway, and then we have, it was very jestery, right? Like he does kind of look like a court jester. Anyway, but I mean, the great part of this story really is that he kills him in the lavatory. And that nobody wants to disrupt him because he needs a moment. Right, so they're assuming he's just, not feeling well in there. All right, here's Samson and Delilah.
The R-rated version.
Yes, definitely what they said. Here's Samson destroying the temple. You notice his head's still shaved, and he's still got a little buzz cut going on there, but he's got his beard.
God gave him his strength back.
God gives him his strength back to destroy them. One last time, one final hurrah. All right, and then we move into to next week. So just before I pray us out, just a reminder for next week. At the end of Judges, it is obvious that the people of God are spiraling out of control. Yet even as the people fall into unfaithfulness, there are still glimpses of hope. Those who love and serve God in the midst of difficulty. So join us next week as we talk about Hannah and Samuel and Ruth. Should be a good week.
Good stuff.
So, all right. Anything else, Father Stephen?
Nope.
All right. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Eternal God, in whose perfect kingdom no sword is drawn but the sword of righteousness, no strength known but the strength of love. So mightily spread abroad your spirit, that all peoples may be gathered under the banner of the Prince of Peace, as children of one Father, to whom be dominion and glory now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
All right, we'll see you next week, everybody.
See you next week.
Bye.
Thanks so much, Mother Cameron.
You too.